With an epoxy table prep, all you need to do is make sure that you sand and clear out any debris with a microfiber towel. And you can certainly do a flood coat or a seal coat, as they say, with epoxy. In this case, because of timing, we're going to use shellac. It works great. All you have to do is make sure that you cover the entirety of the board and let it dry appropriately. It usually takes about 15-20 minutes. We'll do both sides to avoid any cupping or curling with our piece of wood here, and we'll get started here momentarily. We're just using a microfiber towel to clean up the dust and debris that will still be on the wood from our sanding process, then moving over to our roller that is covered in shellac. A little goes a long way. Just going to do some even applications across the entire board. Don't be afraid to dab your brush in and make sure that the wood just absorbs all that it can. This way, we can be assured of no air bubbles. If you doubt it, do more than one coat. It dries in 15-20 minutes and is really easy to apply with a foam-based roller. Unfortunately, we didn't capture the pour process, but in this table, we did 2 coats of epoxy and pigment, leveraging the base coat with the gray, followed up with the copper, teal, and blue. It's a beautiful composition, and we followed it up with a darker contrasting black, white, more copper, and again that little bit of blue, and it all just came together quite nicely. So there are plenty of epoxy videos. Stone Coat actually does a wonderful job of explaining their process, and I would just advise that you try a variety of methods to match what your aesthetic is going to be on a smaller piece, and that way you'll be ready to build a larger tabletop. For sanding, we use a procession of 240, 320, 400, 600, 800, 1000, 1500, 2000, and 3000. That'll make it so the table is a nice, even sanding throughout, gets rid of any marks, and on top of that, makes it so polishing is a breeze. If you don't already have one, you might want to invest in just getting a cheap sprayer. We fill it with water, and then just do a nice, even coat across. And for every time we sand, we're going to hit it horizontally and vertically, the same speed, the same pace, wet sanding, and we're going to do that for every single grit. It's important in between each pass that you wipe it down with a microfiber or even a paper towel if you want to spend a little additional time, just making sure you get every little piece out of the way for the next pass with the sandpaper. This way you're not worrying about whether or not a little chunk is going to screw up your nice sand pattern, because when you're done you shouldn't see any swirls. Get in this pattern here. Like that's probably about where we need to be at for the 400. Then when you're done with one pass on the horizontal, you do the same thing. So the nice thing is, again, if you do it horizontal and vertical instead of a swirl pattern, you know that you've hit everything equally. Then again, between each pass, you make sure you wipe it up. Don't want that extra dust to clog up your sandpaper throughout any of the process. And again, be sure to inspect it between passes. Make sure that anything in your pattern, if there's anything you need to touch up, you address it before you move on. And every once in a while, you're going to have a little divot or something that comes out and it makes a little pit hole. I can't say enough about this Starbond accelerator and just a simple CI glue. It's just super glue. If you're working with clear, it works wonderful. If you need black, you can add tint to the super glue, but certainly Starbond also sells a black variant, and it's pretty easy. We have a video that shows it, but we don't have any necessity for that yet, but hopefully I just wanted to let you know that it's available. So right now, we just got done with 1,000. And I can say that more than likely, this is good enough. Most times you're not going to really see visually the distance, but I think, just personally, you get a little extra detail and more clarity with every sand. So if the piece warrants it, a little extra time will really make it stand out. 1,500. And we're just gradually getting this to a nice finer and finer grit, so that way polishing will be so much easier. Now remember, take time early on, but take time later on too. The reality is each step requires its own diligence. So you might think that is doing less because the grit's lower, but the reality is these final steps are showing off your earlier work, and it's going to make your polishing job so much easier if you take your time and ensure that you have a nice, even sand. 2,000. So again, each pass, take your time, make sure that your marks, if you're thinking about, like, man, I gotta make sure that all this is even, make sure that your swirls, your pattern, have a little bit in between each pass. So you can see that these lines here, that indicates that I'm pretty consistent with my speed and that everything is getting the same exact treatment. And with every pass, you get more clarity. 3,000. All right. So you can see that every single pass just ends up making just a little bit more clear. We can certainly go up to even 12,000 in some extreme cases, but for this project and for the detail that we're looking for, 3,000 is perfectly great. In fact, most of the time you might even find that stopping at 1,000 might be your preferred method. So all depends on what the end finish needs to be. When you're finishing up your table, you'll inevitably find that you may have some drips if you haven't had the chance to wipe them off around an hour and a half to 4 hours after you do your initial pour, depending on what epoxy you're using. We historically use a grinder with a nice sanding bit here, and you grind down to a nice even looking surface above the wood, but just deep enough to make sure that you have this nice smooth surface across the entire footprint.
As a general guideline, when we mount pin legs, we generally try to go 2 inches in on each side, and how we actually do that to save time is we use our business cards. So if you kind of take a look here, this is how we do it. Our business cards are 2 inches wide, and this makes it a lot easier to mount, and it's perfect every time.
After you've marked where the screws go, just pre-drill your holes and you're off to the races. You'll never regret taking the time to make sure that the holes were been pre-drilled and you won't run the risk of cracking the wood. For polishing, we like to use a 3M polishing compound. This 3-step process is always done right by us, and certainly there are plenty of others out there, but this is what we use with an orbital sander and the 3 pads that are adjacent to that. Each pad that we bought corresponds to a finish. With the orbital sander and pad in place, you apply a fairly small amount because a little goes a long way. Then you'll want to spread it out start at a very low speed and start your polishing process. Gradually increase speed, and you'll notice that the polish will eventually give way to the gloss finish. So with just one coat, we already see a big difference. So we just wipe off the excess, and then we're going to rinse and repeat on coat 1, and then move up to coat 2 and coat 3. You can see it's already starting to look pretty spectacular. All right, now we're on to part 2. As with before, you apply just a little bit sporadically, and then you only apply enough for your working area. This is actually probably too much, but we'll work it in. So we'll make sure that our speed is down to 1. We start out with 1, we press a little more firm, we work it in to our working area. This desk is only 2 foot by 4 foot, so we can pretty much get about 2/3 of it or 1/3 of it done in one swoop. Turn it on with level 1, and then we'll work our way up to level 6. So as we're going along here, you'll notice that we have a little bit of coat, and there's little hints of the gloss underneath, and that just means that the polish is starting to heat up, and there's enough friction to where it's taking on to the surface there, and that's great. That's exactly what you want, and eventually it'll all start coming across as clear. So we can see on the edges that it's starting to take hold, and we just got to keep on pressing forward until the whole thing has that nice gloss sheen. And just like that, we have a pretty polished table. Thank you for watching the creation process of this particular project. And if you'd like to see more or have any questions on a given process, we're always happy to provide information. Again, thank you for watching. And if we've earned your subscription, please like, share, and subscribe.